Let me invite you to be turning to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, please. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. As you arrive, this final chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes finds Solomon making some counsel that you probably will be quite familiar with. Again, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them." Again, we probably have heard that as Christians many times in our study of God's Word and in growing up in Bible classes and the like. Let me read for you one commentator, and this is a commentator from a good ways back, I think probably a century or more, but anyways, he offers these remarks about this verse. Quote, "The royal preacher's application of his sermon concerning the vanity of the world and everything in it." Now that's what he is saying by way of summary of what this verse is all about. Notice he says it is the preacher's application of his sermon. But now he's going to offer his paraphrase of it. He says, quote, "You that are young, flatter yourselves with expectations of great things from it, but believe those that have tried it. It yields no solid satisfaction to a soul. Therefore, that you may not be deceived by this vanity, nor too much disturbed by it, remember your Creator, and so guard yourselves against the mischiefs that arise from the vanity of the creature." End of quote. As I read the verse and as I hear that commentator's analysis of it, I do tend to agree that it appears that what Solomon is doing here is counseling, yes, the young, but I believe by extension all ages. But what he is counseling is for them to accept and adopt the prescription for avoiding the vanity, the meaninglessness of life. And here's the prescription. Remember your Creator. Now, if that is what he's doing, that certainly agrees with the thesis of Ecclesiastes, right? You remember what that was. Solomon was setting forth, life is meaningless without God. And so what's the prescription? To avoid that vanity, remember your Creator, remember God. And this certainly coincides with the conclusion of Solomon's experiment on the purpose of life, which he is going to announce at the end of this chapter as the conclusion of the book. Again, look at verse 13 of this chapter. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep His commandments, remember your Creator. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Something else that I found interesting with regards to this verse of chapter 12 and verse 1 is, I believe it identifies in alternate words what we have in our series characterized as wisdom. Now, we did, it's not on the board here, and I don't think it's even in your paper that you have as an outline, but we did offer a clarification with regards to wisdom. We wanted to make sure we were talking about the same wisdom, true wisdom. True wisdom. And again, what we're saying is choose wisdom, choose true wisdom. And if I'm not mistaken, here Solomon is just using some alternate words for true wisdom. That's remember your Creator. See, that's what constitutes true wisdom. To remember your Creator. Now, if you have been with us throughout this series, we have been advancing and then providing some practical applications of what Solomon appears to be urging upon all who again wish to avoid experiencing not only vanity and meaningless of life, but misery. Introducing misery into our lives. And that's why you find this title, Choose Wisdom to Prevent Misery. Now hopefully, or if you did forget, hopefully you might remember where it is that we have taken this principle or maxim from earlier in the book of Ecclesiastes. You're welcome to go back there, but I'll just read it for you. In Ecclesiastes chapter 8, we found this beginning in about the middle of verse 5. A wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment, because to every purpose there is time and judgment. Therefore, the misery of man is great upon him. So again, we found both of these, wisdom, misery. And we suggested from what we read in the book of Ecclesiastes, and particularly there in chapter 8, it would appear that what Solomon is doing is he's urging us to choose wisdom so that we can prevent introducing misery into our lives. Now let me share one of the reasons I ask us to look at Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 1, because it was an interesting discovery for me. If you're still there in chapter 12 and verse 1, when you compare the verses that we just read in Ecclesiastes chapter 8 with this one here in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, you will come to find that the same Hebrew word that is translated misery back in Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 6 is here in chapter 12 and verse 1 translated evil days. It's the same word, friends. And again, it's not because I know Hebrew. I just have the resources that allow me to look that up. This is the identical word in the original language. One place, translators translate it misery. The next time it appears, or at least another time it appears, they translate it evil days. But it's the same word. Now, I'll make some observations about that in just a minute, but I first have to make a confession to you. Until just very recently, in reading chapter 12 and verse 1, I believe I had been misunderstanding what the them was at the end of the verse. You remember where it says, and thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them? You see that? I thought this verse was promoting remembering our Creator during the days of our youth, because too often failing to do that renders us less likely to find pleasure in God, in our Creator, in the later years. Now, I'm not dismissing that as true. Hasn't that been, for some of you, observations that we've seen? Somebody refuses to accept God as a young person, and then if you have an opportunity to know them 30, 40, 50 years later, and you try to reintroduce them to accepting God, remembering your Creator, many times life has hardened them to where they're even less inclined to entertain that. Now, again, I'm not dismissing that might be a true observation, But I've come to the conclusion, I don't think that's what Solomon's saying. Notice the them is plural. You see, if he was talking about our Creator, I think he would have said, I have no pleasure in him. But he says in them. And so now I think the them corresponds to the evil days, or the years that those evil days would entail. That's, Ricky, I'm not going to bore you with grammar, but that's the closest antecedent. All right, and when you're looking to try to identify what a pronoun is a substitute for, you're supposed to look for the closest antecedent. So the closest antecedent that is plural in this verse is years. Now here's why I offer all of this. Let's translate here in chapter 12 and verse 1, evil days as misery. Remember, that's the word, same word that's translated misery back in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. If you read it that way, it would seem better to understand that this is what Solomon is urging us to do. Solomon is urging us to remember God. And remember, that's just another way of saying learn to fear and obey God. And remember, that's just another way of saying choose true wisdom as the course for your life. Why, Solomon? Well, now fill it in. Remember your Creator. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Choose true wisdom to direct your course in life as early as you can before misery comes. Before you introduce misery into your life for choosing to do otherwise. And then you find no pleasure in those final years of your life. And that really does kind of harmonize with the context, because you know what Solomon's going to do from this point on, or at least verses 2 through about verse 6 or 7. You know what he's going to do? He is now going to begin to depict, Sister Irene, those last years of our life. You know, the senior years, right? And he's going to do it in some very descriptive, sometimes even humorous ways. But you see, that's what the focus is at the end of your life. If that is Solomon's, quote, application to his sermon, which that commentator said this seems to be, if this is his application, don't you agree that perfectly harmonizes with what Ecclesiastes chapter 8 is advancing? See, this isn't the first time Solomon gets to the application of his sermon. Here in chapter 8, he again is urging us to follow this counsel. Choose wisdom, true wisdom. Allow God, who is the Creator, who is the architect of life, in all of His wisdom, allow Him in His wisdom to direct your course in life so that you can prevent misery. Because if you don't, when you get to the end of this life, you are going to experience not only vanity, you are going to experience misery in a heightened form. Because now you're getting to the end of this life. And if you have nothing to look forward to, if you have no hope beyond this life, can you imagine the misery that you experience as you grow closer, take each step closer to the grave? See, that's where this context is going to end. Verse 7, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. If you want to be able to find some pleasure, if you want to be able to find some meaning at the end of your life, You need to choose wisdom now so that you can prevent not only vanity, meaninglessness, but misery. So, what we have done is we have taken that principle, that maximum, choose wisdom so that you can prevent misery being introduced into your life. And we've been making some applications that seem to be offered by Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. So let's go there. We're not going to get through this one, but at least get it introduced. So go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 8, and you can follow these on your outline. You can look up here on the board. But it does seem, first of all, he says, choose true wisdom so that you can prevent misery by accepting authority. Remember, that's where true wisdom begins, doesn't it? Fear God and obey Him. And yet with that reverential awe for God's sovereignty, it should then translate into our being submissive people. Surrendering, submitting to delegated authority that God has put in place and ordained in this life, in the home, in the workplace, in society, even in the church. Secondly, choosing wisdom will prevent misery by expecting an end. In verses, I think it's 6 and 7, he's going to talk about, you don't know when it's coming, but it's coming. You can count on that. There's a time coming when you'll meet the end of this life. You ought to expect that. But again, wisdom not only counsels you to expect it, wisdom says you don't know when it's going to be. It can come at any time. And not only that, true wisdom then says you need to expect not only the appointment of death, but also the divine appointment of judgment that comes after death. Friends, refusing to do that, you're going to introduce misery into your life. Dealing with death here of loved ones, with your own approaching death, and certainly you are going to experience eternal misery when this life is over, if you've not prepared for that. But now quickly, let's at least introduce this one. And not to call out Sister Angie, but she said a couple weeks ago, Mike, are we going to get to this one? Maybe she knows me so well. Are we ever going to get to this one? But she mentioned this one, and particularly, I think it was maybe point B. And so we'll try to at least get to that point. I'm not sure we'll be able to develop it, Angie, but I hope to at least introduce it enough that we can come to highlight that point. So let's think about this application of choosing wisdom to prevent misery. Friends, I think most of us here, looking out on you and knowing myself, we've been travelers on this journey called life for a while. But I don't think it takes too long before in our own experiences, we are impressed with the need to prepare ourselves for encountering situations in life that are going to leave us perplexed, puzzled, questioning. Each of us, no doubt, could attest to this reality, that living life has found us experiencing things, maybe witnessing things that have puzzled us, has baffled us. There have been circumstances and situations that we observe in life that leave us asking questions. Maybe questions that begin with why. Why did this happen? Maybe to me. Or maybe I'm witnessing something going on in somebody else's life and I say, why did that happen to them? Maybe the questions come out in the form of what? What does this mean? Maybe we can turn that into a question with how. How am I supposed to understand this? How should I understand these occurrences, these happenings, these situations, these circumstances? Again, I think most travelers in life would acknowledge that. There are things that happen to us that we observe that leave us perplexed, asking questions. Why? What? How? And when you analyze those particular situations or occurrences, happenings, whatever they might be, you begin to find that they really touch a variety of areas of our life. I don't know if we want to categorize them so much, but just to allow us to see that it's not just in one particular area of our life that we might find ourselves asking these questions. Sometimes they come in the area of moral dilemmas. In other words, we see something happening or one of our children ask us, is this right or wrong? And we might be perplexed as to how to answer them because we're not exactly sure. What principle should I draw on to make this determination? Or maybe we hear a moral decision announced by somebody else, a person, a group, a government, and we're saying, how should I view that? Is that morally right? Or maybe I'm asking, why did they think that to be morally right? But not only moral dilemmas, sometimes they come in emotional quandaries, where we see something, experience something, and we're just left not knowing how to feel. Have you ever been there? Or maybe the feeling you're experiencing almost produces guilt. It's saying, I shouldn't feel that way. Moral dilemmas, emotional quandaries. Sometimes this comes when we observe social injustices. Has that been in the headlines over the past decades? How should I view these? How should I respond to these? What should be my reaction toward these things? And then sometimes they even fall in this category. We wonder about God's providence. What role did God play in this? How do I understand? How do I understand its unfolding in keeping with what I know about God? Now again, that's not an exhaustive list. I'm just asking us to consider these perplexities that sometimes we encounter in life. They can happen in a variety of areas and realms of our life. Now, I hope you have gone back to Ecclesiastes chapter 8 because I'm asking you to consider some that Solomon was questioning. Look at verse 10. And I don't know, I think I explained to you, we recently had a summer series dealing with the book of Ecclesiastes. And I think it was drawn to my attention there how often Solomon is saying throughout this book, and I saw. You see, this is Solomon making observations in life. This is what he's seeing play out in life. And that's what's causing him sometimes to come away with the conclusion, it's all vanity. It's meaningless. This is what I'm seeing. And that's how this starts out. All this have I seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man rules over another to his own hurt. Have we seen that? Just turn on the news and see what's going on over in the region of Russia and Ukraine. One man ruling over other men to their hurt and even his own hurt. Then Solomon goes on. And I saw, right? Verse 10, and so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This is also vanity. Again, there are different interpretations of that. The best one I come away with is, here is Solomon saying, I see wicked people sometimes celebrated in life and in death when they're buried. It's as though people have forgotten what they had been doing all life. Have we seen that ever? When's the last time you have ever attended a funeral and something was bad said about the person? When's the last time? When's the first time? Yet sometimes we know those people, right? Solomon says, that's perplexing to me. So much so, he says, it's vanity. It's vanity. But then look at verse 11. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Is that true or what? Here is Solomon saying, just retribution sometimes is not administered in a timely fashion. And you know what results from that? The wicked are emboldened to continue in their wickedness, sometimes even increase their wickedness. Look at verse 14. There is a vanity which is done upon the earth, that there be just men, unto whom it happeneth according to the work of the wicked. Again, there be wicked men, to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said that this is also vanity. You understand what he's saying? Yeah, I'm witnessing what's going on under the sun here. I'm watching people in various places, and here's one of the things I'm observing. There are apparent injustices, where we are beholding good people experiencing bad circumstances and consequences for their good. All the while, then, we regularly see bad people who are enjoying prosperity and blessings that we probably thought would have been promised and reserved for those who are doing good. Solomon says, I'm left a little perplexed. This seems to be vanity. And please understand, this isn't the first time he's brought up these matters of injustices. In fact, go back to chapter 3 quickly. Look at chapter 3. Here again is what he had been seeing under the sun. Verse 16. And moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment. What is that, friends? That's a judicial courtroom. That's where official decisions are being made. That wickedness was there. Have we ever seen that? And the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. Look at chapter 4 and verse 1. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of such as are oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power. But they, again back to the oppressed, they had no comforter. Look at chapter 5 and verse 8. Like I said, this is one of those things that he had seen and brings before his audience many times. Look at chapter 5 and verse 8. If you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, look at it, marvel not at the matter. I think he's saying it's so common you don't have to marvel at this. And then finally, look at chapter 7 and verse 15. All things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There is a just man that perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man that prolongs his life in his wickedness. Do you think Solomon had found himself perplexed, bewildered, questioning why? Why is this? How is this? Well, what is to be made of this? Now, we're going to have to stop there, and so we didn't get very far into this, but here's one thing that we have to do, lest we, I think, make a false assumption about these questions. Friends, these questions are not just reserved for those who lack spiritual wisdom. We might expect that, right? Well, we might expect a person who is carnally minded. We might expect a person who is very carnal and very worldly in their thinking might look at these things and say, matter of fact, let me just ask you this. How often have you heard somebody say, that's not fair? I mean, and that seems to become, and I don't know, I mean, all I can go on is my own experience, but that seems to become more and more a response by people. That's just not fair. Or sometimes about, I don't deserve this. Or looking at, they don't deserve this. What is that? That is their announcing, I see an injustice here. I see something that perplexes me. That's not fair. Now, I've gotten to the point, sometimes I tell my grandchildren, when I hear them say stuff, I said, whoa. First of all, who's judging fairness here? And secondly, are you saying that all the affairs of this life are fair and just and deserved? But I think that's what Solomon is trying to keep before us. That's part of this vanity of life. If you take God out of the picture, all of these things happening at such frequency, it leaves you puzzled, without answer. Now, like I said, it's not reserved just for those who are without spiritual wisdom. Let me ask you, who's being perplexed here? Solomon. You do remember what God said to Solomon, right? When he requested, I think we read this last, when he requested wisdom, what did God say? I'm going to give you wisdom so that there has not been anyone like you before you. Jesus would call Solomon to the attention of those that he was speaking to, and he said, you know, the queen of the south, Sheba, is going to rise up in judgment against you because she traveled from the ends of the world to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and there is one who is greater than Solomon who's standing before you. See, even God speaks to the wisdom, the spiritually endowed, or the divinely endowed wisdom of this man, and yet he's the one asking these questions. He's the one talking about being perplexed at these injustices, these questions. Remember, he's the one who is presenting the most basic of perplexities. What's life really all about? What is this life all about? Now, we're going to, Lord willing, next week, we're going to add to Solomon others, friends, who I believe we would esteem as highly spiritual individuals. And the only reason I believe we need to set this before us is so we don't think, if we start having these questions, that somehow that's because we're not spiritually wise, or we're not spiritually discerning people, or it speaks to the fact that we're not where we ought to be spiritually. I'm just trying to get us to appreciate, friends, there are some people historically who are presented to us in the highest esteem by God who have questions. questions touching moral dilemmas, questions touching emotional quandaries, questions touching social injustices, and yes, even questions touching God's providence. We have to be prepared for this. These might be questions that we're going to entertain sometime. Maybe they're entertaining now. So we want to allow Solomon to help us understand true wisdom to prevent the misery that we can introduce into our lives because we see these things, we're perplexed, we feel we have no recourse. You realize that is what causes some people to do what they do. By way of just atrocious tragedy. I mean, we can't even imagine shooting their own children, taking their spouse, and then their own life. We question, what would cause a person to do that? Possibly feeling so perplexed about a situation and having no recourse other than, what can I do about this? Now, their options that they consider might be so in line with the devil because they're thinking only under the sun. They're not listening to true wisdom. But anyways, I hope this has practical application in our own experiences of life. I know I've asked questions. I know of people who have asked questions. And because they didn't get maybe the answer they were looking for, maybe because they did not look to true wisdom, you know what? Sometimes that had devastating effects in their lives. They've introduced misery into their own lives, and that misery has kind of overflown into the lives of others. Solomon's counsel is, remember your Creator. Solomon's counsel is, fear God, keep His commandments. Solomon's counsel is, choose wisdom here. In your approach to life, choose wisdom. Listen to the Creator. He's infinitely wise. He's the one who made us. He knows why He made us. He made this earth for us. This is all His provision. To do so, well, you can at least prevent as much misery maybe as possible to be introduced into your life. Or as Ecclesiastes 12:1 says, when you get to those final years, you actually can still find some pleasure in life. Again, remember your Creator. That begins by putting ourselves in a right relationship with Him, and we should be so thankful that Jesus Christ has made that possible. If you're not in a right relationship with God because you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, we urge you, if you have questions on how to do that, contact us. If you know how to do this and you need somebody just to have you do it, help you do it, call us, please.